October 6, 1973, deep in a reinforced bunker beneath Damascus, Syrian generals are watching a situation map that shows mathematical perfection. Their fingers trace red arrows sweeping across the Golan Heights. The numbers are intoxicating. 1,400 Syrian tanks versus fewer than 180 scattered Israeli defenders. It's not just a favorable ratio, it's a guaranteed victory written in the language of pure arithmetic. Standing in the shadows of that command room are men in different uniforms, Soviet military advisors. They're not just observers, they're architects. For years, Moscow has poured billions of rubles into the Syrian Arab army. They've shipped their most advanced tanks, their cutting-edge night vision technology, their proven tactical doctrines tested across Eastern Europe. They've built what they believe is an unstoppable machine, a steel fist designed to crush Western resistance through sheer mathematical inevitability. One of these advisors, let's call him Colonel Dmitry Vulov, checks his watch. The sun is setting over the volcanic plateau. It's Yom Kippur, the holiest day on the Jewish calendar. Israeli reservists are at home with their families, fasting, praying, their radios turned off. Their military bases are skeleton crews, the timing is flawless. According to every wargaming model run in Moscow's strategic planning centers, Syrian armored columns should sweep across the Golan and reach the Jordan River within 24 hours. There is no variable in the equation that allows for defeat. The physics are simple: mass times velocity equals momentum. You cannot stop a tsunami with a handful of sandbags. The offensive begins exactly as planned. 1,000 artillery pieces open fire simultaneously, turning the horizon into a curtain of flame. The earth shakes, then comes the steel. 3 massive Syrian infantry divisions, spearheaded by columns of T-55 tanks and the terrifying new T-60 tanks, roll across the purple line. It's a textbook Soviet offensive. Overwhelming force applied to a collapsing defense. The Syrian tank commanders can already taste victory. For the first 6 hours, everything proceeds according to script. Reports flood into the Damascus command center. Israeli minefields breached, anti-tank ditches crossed. Defensive positions overrun. The thin line of defenders is being crushed under the weight of hundreds of tons of Soviet steel. Vulov allows himself a slight smile. This is why the Soviet system works. Superior technology combined with superior numbers creates an equation that cannot be solved by courage alone. The T-60 tank is the crown jewel of Soviet engineering. Its 115mm smoothbore gun can punch through any Western tank at combat range. Its low profile makes it difficult to hit. And crucially, it possesses something the Israelis don't have: active infrared night vision. As darkness falls over the Golan Heights, the Syrian advantage should become absolute. The Israelis, fighting in older Western tanks without night vision capability, should become blind. The Soviet advisors expect the Israeli defense to collapse into chaos under the cover of darkness. It's another mathematical certainty, but as midnight approaches on October 6th, something changes. The rhythm of the teleprinters in the command center shifts. The reports coming from the 7th Infantry Division in the northern sector are no longer triumphant. They're confused, then alarmed, then desperate. A frantic voice crackles over the radio network. It's a Syrian battalion commander from the lead echelon, and he's screaming. Not the controlled military communication they've trained for. He's genuinely terrified. He's reporting that his lead company of 10 tanks has been destroyed in less than 2 minutes, liquidated, gone. The Syrian general in the command center grabs the handset. His knuckles are white. By air support, he demands. Is the Israeli Air Force active? No air support. The voice crackles back, rising in pitch with barely controlled panic. Direct fire, long range, we cannot see them. They are shooting us from the darkness. They are hitting us from 3,000 meters. The bunker falls silent. Vulov exchanges a look with his fellow Soviet advisors. This is technically impossible. The battle is taking place in complete darkness. The Israelis are operating older Western tanks, modified British Centurions, and American patents. These machines do not possess the technology to engage targets effectively at 3,000 meters in daylight conditions, let alone at night without infrared searchlights. And yet the reports keep coming. One T-55 destroyed. Another T-6 to burning, an entire platoon gone. By dawn on October 7th, something is terribly wrong with the mathematics of this war. Vulov stares at the situation map. The red arrows representing the Syrian offensive aren't sweeping down toward the Sea of Galilee as predicted. They're bunching up, stalling, dying in a narrow corridor of volcanic rock that Syrian soldiers are already calling the Valley of Tears. The name is spreading through the ranks like a virus. The Soviet advisors start pulling technical schematics. They scrutinize intelligence reports on Israeli order of battle. They look for secret weapons. Has America shipped some new guided missile system overnight? Are there NATO mercenaries manning those guns? The numbers coming back from the front lines are horrifying. In one sector, a single platoon of 4 Israeli tanks is holding back an entire Syrian brigade. Not for minutes, for hours, Syrian tank commanders report something impossible. They crest a ridge expecting to find the enemy routed, only to be met with devastatingly accurate fire that targets the weak points of their armor, the turret rings, the fuel cells. The ammunition storage, the precision is surgical. It's mechanical murder delivered with the efficiency of an industrial process. When reconnaissance photos arrive later that morning, they show a battlefield transformed into a graveyard. Dozens of Soviet-supplied tanks lay smoking on the black basalt rocks. Their turrets are blown completely off, lying upside down meters away from the hulls. The wreckage stretches for kilometers. Vulov stares at the grainy images. He's looking at the corpses of the Soviet Union's best export technology. The T-60 tank was designed to be the apex predator of mechanized warfare. Low profile, heavy armor, a gun that can penetrate any NATO tank. Yet here in the Golan, they're being slaughtered by tall, boxy, clumsy-looking tanks that look like museum pieces from the 1950s. A junior analyst mutters what everyone is thinking. It defies all logic. The Israelis are outnumbered 14-1. Their tanks are slower, they have smaller caliber guns. They have no night vision systems. How are they stopping the advance? This is the question that will haunt military historians for decades. How does a force that should be mathematically extinct stop what appears to be an unstoppable object? The answer lies not just in the metal, but in a secret that the Soviets have completely overlooked. A ghost in their machine that's about to unravel everything they thought they knew about armored warfare. But before we dive deeper into the mystery of the Valley of Tears and the investigation that follows, understand this. What you're about to discover isn't just a story about tanks. It's about the moment when the Soviet Union's most fundamental belief about warfare, the belief that quantity possesses a quality all its own, died burning in volcanic dust. Back in Damascus, the situation is spiraling beyond control. Syrian commanders are accusing their tank crews of cowardice. The tank crews are accusing their commanders of sending them into a death trap. But Vulov knows better. He's read the psychological profiles. Syrian tank crews aren't cowards. They're dying by the hundreds, pressing forward into withering fire. The problem isn't morale. The problem is something far more disturbing. By the afternoon of October 7th, a new report arrives that changes everything. A Syrian recovery vehicle has managed to drag a disabled Israeli tank back across the lines before being forced to retreat under fire. It's a Centurion, but it looks wrong, modified. The barrel is different. The engine deck has been altered. It is covered in strange reactive armor plates and storage boxes that do and match the original British design. Vulov orders a technical team to the front immediately. They need to see this machine up close. They need to understand what's killing their T-60 tanks before the entire offensive collapses. They need to know if this is some new American superweapon or something else entirely. As they prepare to leave Damascus for the front lines, the artillery thunder in the distance grows louder. The Israelis aren't just holding anymore. Reports suggest they're beginning to counterattack. This shouldn't be possible. They should be dead. The Soviet doctrine has always relied on mass. Stalin himself said that quantity has a quality all its own. But in the volcanic dust of the Golan Heights, that fundamental truth is failing. The advisors are about to step into a crime scene where the victim, their own ideology, and the killer is a mystery wrapped in British steel and American engineering. October 8, 1973, northern sector of the Golan Heights. Colonel Vulov stands at the edge of the plateau, wind whipping volcanic dust into his face. The smell is overwhelming. Burning diesel, melted rubber, scorched metal. The acrid stench of modern warfare. He is no longer in the comfortable abstraction of the Damascus bunker with its clean maps and neat arrows. He's a few kilometers from the actual front line, standing in a chaotic staging area where the remnants of the Syrian 7th Infantry Division are trying desperately to regroup. What he sees defies every law of military science he's ever studied. The Syrian army is equipped with T-55 and T-62 tanks. These are low-slung, aggressive machines designed to present the smallest possible target profile to the enemy. They embody Soviet philosophy: hard to hit, harder to kill, sleek, efficient, deadly. According to every textbook Vulov has read, according to every lecture he attended at the Frunze Military Academy, the Centurion should be easy prey for modern Soviet tanks. Yet somehow, impossibly, the dinosaur is winning. His eyes have the 1,000-yard stare of someone who's seen something that broke his understanding of reality. Tell me what you saw, Vulov demands through a translator. How are they hitting you? You have the night vision systems. The lieutenant's eyes are unfocused. His hands shake as he lights a cigarette. We turn on the infrared searchlight to find a target. We scan the darkness through our scope. We see nothing, empty terrain. But the moment we activate the light, within seconds, a shell hits us. It's as if the light itself attracts the bullet. The T-62 tank utilizes active infrared technology to see at night. But to anyone with even a basic passive night viewing device, or even just looking directly at the emitter source, the projector glows with a dull, angry red light. It's a beacon, a target. So how are they targeting a T-60 to the instant it turns on its spotlight? It's as if the Israelis can see the invisible beam itself. The mystery deepens when Vulov examines the damage on a T-55 tank that has been towed back to the rear for potential salvage. He walks around it slowly, studying the impact point. This isn't a lucky shot. The shell has pierced the turret ring, the chaotic moving joint between the tank's body and its rotating turret. It's one of the weakest points on any tank, but also one of the hardest to hit. This tank was traveling at 30 kilometers per hour over rough terrain when he was hit. And compensate for the bounce and sway of his own tank, all in a split second. To shoot accurately, a T-55 or T-62 tank typically has to halt, allow the suspension to settle, then fire. But the reports from the front claim the Israelis are firing while maneuvering, firing from positions that seem geometrically impossible. It's a nightmare of volcanic ridges, sudden drops, and massive basalt boulders scattered like a giant's game of dice. It's tank-killing country. But they decalculated that the T-62's superior power-to-weight ratio would allow them to swarm over the obstacles through sheer numbers. Reports flood in describing what Syrian soldiers are calling pop-up attacks. Then suddenly, without warning, the turret of an Israeli tank appears over the crest of a ridge like a jack-in-the-box. Before the column can react, before the gunners can even traverse their turrets, the Israeli tank reverses backward, disappearing behind the ridge. It's like fighting phantoms, a Syrian general complains, slamming his fist on the hood of a jeep hard enough to leave a dent. And they cannot depress low enough to hit them when they're below us in the wadis. They're dancing around us, playing with us. Vulov stares at the tactical map again. The Valley of Tears, that's what the soldiers are calling the breakthrough sector now. The name has spread throughout the army. In a space of just a few kilometers, hundreds of Syrian tanks are burning. The smoke is so thick it's creating an artificial twilight, blocking out the afternoon sun. An Israeli company commander, With the call signs, Vika was heard coordinating his unit over an open frequency. He's ordering tanks to move to position Aleph, then position Bet, then position Gimel, the senior analyst explains, playing the tape again. But Colonel, listen carefully to the background noise. We hear only one engine, only one gun firing. One tank. It sounds like a single tank rushing back and forth across the battlefield at breakneck speed, firing like a madman, using radio calls to create the illusion of an entire platoon. One tank, Vulov asks, his voice incredulous. You're telling me one tank is holding up an entire brigade? The Soviet military worldview is crumbling before Vulov's eyes. The Soviet system believes in the collective. The battalion, the regiment, the mass formation. The idea that individual crew skill or a specific mechanical quirk could override the mathematics of mass formations is heresy. It contradicts the fundamental principles of Marxist-Leninist military doctrine. There's something about the Israeli tank itself that they're missing. Some modification or adaptation that's not appearing in the intelligence briefs. Vulov remembers the dossier on the Centurion tank. It was developed in 1945 as Britain's answer to German heavy tanks. It's underpowered compared to modern designs, its operational range is short. So why is it moving with such unexpected agility across the volcanic rock? Why isn't it overheating in the Middle Eastern sun? Why is its rate of fire nearly double that of the supposedly superior T-62? The brass casing weighs nearly 40 pounds. The interior of the T-62 is cramped, deliberately designed to be as small as possible to reduce the target profile. To load the gun, the loader has to wrestle the heavy shell into the breech, while the gun automatically ejects the spent casing with violent force. It's a brutal, dangerous dance performed inside a steel box that reaches temperatures of 50 degrees Celsius in the desert sun. After a few hours of continuous combat, Syrian loaders are physically exhausted. Their hands are burned from touching hot metal. Their shoulders are bruised from the recoiling breech. Meanwhile, the Israelis are reportedly firing 6, maybe 8 rounds per minute. And they've been fighting continuously for 48 hours straight without relief. Not a burnt-out hole, not a destroyed wreck. I need a functioning machine. As evening falls on October 8th, the strategic situation begins to shift, but not in the way the Soviet planners expected. The Syrians aren't running out of tanks, they still have hundreds in reserve. They're running out of the will to advance. The Valley of Tears is choked with the dead. And still, impossibly, that thin line of old, boxy tanks on the distant ridge holds firm. Each flash represents another T-62 dying. He realizes with creeping horror that he's not watching a conventional battle of numbers and firepower. And the Soviet philosophy, the doctrine that conquered half of Europe, the system that crushed the Wehrmacht, is bleeding to death in volcanic dust. The mystery is about what exactly is inside those Israeli tanks that is transforming them into rapid-fire snipers capable of engaging targets they shouldn't even be able to see. Is it an advanced computer system? The answer arrives the next morning in the form of a captured shot-called tank, the Israeli designation for their modified Centurion, towed away from the battlefield by a desperate Syrian recovery team that lost 3 vehicles in the attempt. When Vulov finally climbs inside the enemy turret and examines what he finds there, what shocks him isn't the complexity of some secret superweapon. What shocks him is the elegant simplicity of the solution. The Israelis haven't won through technological magic. They've won by understanding something the Soviets forgot in their pursuit of mathematical perfection, the human factor. October 9, 1973, the crisis point. The battle for the Valley of Tears has been raging for 3 days and 3 nights without pause. The sheer volume of fire has ground the black basalt rocks into fine gray powder that coats everything. Colonel Vulov is now stationed at a forward observation post, looking through a high-powered artillery periscope mounted on a reinforced concrete bunker. Beside him, the Syrian division commander is pale, his hands trembling as he grips a radio handset so tightly his knuckles have gone white. Of the roughly 100 tanks, that started defending this sector, barely 20 remain operational. The Syrian 7th Infantry Division, massively reinforced by the elite Republican Guard equipped with fresh T-60 tanks, is preparing for what they believe will be the final hammer blow. They've pushed the battered Israeli defenders to the very edge of the escarpment. The tactical situation is clear. The Israelis are trapped with their backs to a cliff. Vulov watches through the periscope as wave after wave of T-60 tanks rumble forward. It's a magnificent sight from a purely military perspective, a wall of armor advancing up the slope in textbook formation. A geometric anomaly that explains so much of the previous confusion. The Syrian tanks are attacking uphill. To engage the Israeli tanks dug into defensive positions on the ridge, the T-60 gunners have to elevate their massive 115mm guns upward. As the Syrian tanks crest the steep lava ridges, they encounter a fatal flaw in Soviet design engineering. To keep the T-60 small and difficult to hit, Soviet engineers flattened the turret profile. Consequently, the T-62 has terrible gun depression. It can barely aim downward at all, maybe 4 or 5 degrees at most. Vulov watches in mounting horror as a company of T-60 tanks crests a ridge. The Syrian gunners frantically try to crank their guns downward to shoot at the enemy directly beneath them, but the barrels hit the mechanical stops. They cannot depress far enough. The guns are pointing uselessly over the heads of the Israeli tanks, unable to engage. The Syrian tanks are completely exposed, silhouetted against the sky like targets in a shooting gallery, unable to bring their superior firepower to bear. Conversely, the supposedly obsolete Israeli tanks display a terrifying flexibility. 10 degrees of depression compared to the meager 4 or 5 degrees of the Soviet design, and fire directly into the exposed bellies of the Syrian tanks as they crest the hill. It's a massacre driven by pure geometry. The superior Soviet tank is blind to what's directly in front of it, but even with this critical tactical advantage, the sheer numbers are still overwhelming. The Syrian force, despite horrific losses, still numbers in the hundreds. Then the moment occurs. The twist that will be studied in every military academy, from West Point to the Frunze Academy, for the next 50 years. Just as the Syrian forces are poised to overrun the final ridge, victory perhaps minutes away, the Israeli commander, Lieutenant Colonel Avigdor Kahalani, does something that defies all rational military doctrine. Instead of retreating or preparing for a last stand, he orders his handful of surviving tanks to charge. He's attacking a division with a platoon to the exhausted, terrified Syrian crews who have watched hundreds of their comrades burn over the last 72 hours. This doesn't look like a desperate last stand by a handful of dying tanks. It looks like a fresh counterattack. It looks like Israeli reserves have arrived, reinforcements, a trap, and unable to effectively target the hull-down tanks charging toward them due to the elevation issues. The Syrian lead elements begin to reverse. Individual commanders make the decision to pull back and regroup. The reverse becomes a retreat. The retreat becomes a rout. Within minutes, hundreds of tanks are turning around, trying to escape what they believe is an ambush. "Stop them," he screams at the Syrian commander. "Order them to stop. They have nothing left. You are winning, but it's too late. The psychological collapse is complete. The wall of steel that should have crushed the Israeli defenders is receding like a tide. 1,400 tanks have been stopped, not by superior firepower, not by air support, not by some secret weapon, but by 7 tanks and 1 commander's desperate gamble on human psychology. Hundreds of tanks lay scattered across the volcanic landscape like the discarded toys of an angry child. They have to understand the machine that defeated them. The recovery team has finally succeeded in dragging the captured Israeli tank into a secure garage behind Syrian lines. It took them 3 attempts. 2 recovery vehicles were destroyed in the process. It's a shot call, the Israeli designation for the upgraded Centurion. Vulov circles the beast slowly. It looks battered. The paint is scorched and peeling, but as he climbs onto the engine deck, he realizes immediately that this is not the British tank they knew from intelligence files. Open the engine bay, Vulov orders. An engine notorious for catching fire, you so much as looked at it wrong. It's a diesel, the chief mechanic says, wiping grease from his hands. Vulov feels understanding dawn. Diesel fuel is exponentially harder to ignite than petrol. That explains why their tanks weren't brewing up, weren't catching fire from engine hits the way intelligence predicted they would. And the transmission, Vulov asks, dreading the answer. The Soviet T-55 and T-60 tanks require brutal physical strength to drive. After 2 hours, drivers are exhausted, their arms shake, their reactions slow. They're not just fighting better. They're fresher, more alert, more responsive. The true secret, the ghost in the machine that allowed a single tank to destroy an entire platoon in minutes, is waiting in the turret. The interior is spacious compared to the cramped coffin of a T-62. There's actual room to move. The crew stations are logically arranged. He looks at the breech of the gun, expecting to see some sophisticated auto-loading mechanism, some computer-controlled system. There's nothing. There is none, Colonel. Everything is manual. Impossible. How did they shoot faster than our auto-loader? He looks at the floor of the turret. It's covered in spent brass casings, hundreds of them. He looks at the layout of the ammunition racks, and then he sees it, the modification that changes everything. The Israelis haven't added advanced technology. They've removed complexity. They've stripped the tank down to maximize the one thing the Soviets had completely neglected in their pursuit of mathematical efficiency, the human factor. The turret is tall, spacious. The loader doesn't have to crouch in a cramped space fighting the machine. He stands on a flat turntable floor that rotates with the turret. The ammunition racks are positioned at waist height, easy to reach. The rounds are stored with the nose already pointing toward the breech. The loader doesn't have to wrestle 40-pound shells while avoiding a recoiling gun. He simply grabs, turns, loads, smooth, efficient, human-friendly. After 3 hours of combat, a Syrian loader in a T-62 is broken, exhausted, burned. His loading speed drops to 2, maybe 3 rounds per minute. An Israeli loader in this spacious, well-designed workspace can maintain 6 to 8 rounds per minute for hours. Days even. Rate of fire, that's the secret. Not armor thickness, not gun caliber, not fancy technology. Simple rate of fire. 100 Israeli tanks firing 10 rounds per minute is functionally equivalent to 300 Syrian tanks firing 3 rounds per minute. The math balances out, not because of the number of platforms, but because of the number of shells actually reaching the target. But there's still the mystery of the night battle. The ghost attacks. Vulov moves to the gunner's position. He presses his eye against the rubber eyepiece of the sight, expecting to see some sophisticated thermal imaging system. Some electronic wizardry that would explain the supernatural accuracy. What he sees is a piece of glass. The sight picture is incredibly clear, sharp beyond anything in Soviet tanks, but it's analog, optical. There are no glowing displays. No electronics, just a simple statometric rangefinder, a series of lines used to estimate distance based on the known size of the target. It's almost identical to sights used in World War II. Vulov pulls back, genuinely confused. This is it, he asks the Syrian engineer. This is the ghost technology. It's a telescope. Look at the ammunition, Colonel, the engineer says, pointing to the racks beside the loader's station. It's not how they see, it's what they throw. Vulov moves to the ammunition storage. He pulls out a heavy, sleek projectile. It doesn't look like the explosive shells the Soviet tanks fire. The Soviet doctrine relies on high-explosive anti-tank warheads or traditional steel armor-piercing rounds. This Israeli round is different, fundamentally different. It's marked M392 APDS, armor-piercing discarding sabot. Vulov holds the round in his hands, and suddenly everything about the Valley of Tears clicks into place. This is the killer. This is the secret. Soviet tank doctrine relies heavily on the concept of sloped armor. The T-55 and T-60 tanks are designed with heavily angled frontal plates. The theory is elegant. A traditional steel shell hits the slope and bounces off or ricochets harmlessly. It's a shield built on pure geometry, but the APDS round in Vulov's hands is a cheat code against physics itself. The engineer explains it's a dart kernel, a penetrator made of tungsten carbide wrapped in a shoe called a sabot. When the round leaves the barrel, the shoe falls away. What remains is a dart, a spike, traveling at 1400 meters per second. It concentrates all the kinetic energy of a massive gun into a point the size of a coin. Vulov realizes the full horror of the tactical situation. The APDS round doesn't care about the slope of T-62 armor, it doesn't bounce. It moves so fast and is so incredibly dense that it punches through sloped steel like a needle through fabric. The invincible frontal armor of the T-62, the feature that gave Syrian crews such confidence, is effectively paper to this weapon. Vulov looks at the breech again. Stamped into the metal is a designation that makes his blood run cold, Royal Ordnance L7. This gun isn't American. In 1956, during the Hungarian Revolution, a Soviet T-54 tank was driven onto the grounds of the British Embassy in Budapest by desperate rebels seeking asylum. The British briefly examined the captured tank, realized their current guns couldn't penetrate its revolutionary sloped armor, and immediately commissioned the L7 gun specifically to kill Soviet tanks. The Syrians are being destroyed by a weapon designed 17 years ago, specifically and explicitly to hunt them. The irony is almost poetic, but there's still the mystery of the night battle. Vulov climbs out of the turret and walks to the front of the captured tank. He looks for the infrared searchlight that should be mounted there. There isn't one. Instead, mounted above the main gun is a massive, boxy xenon searchlight. They have white light, Vulov notes, visible light. If they turn this on, they reveal their position to everyone. It's suicide, Vulov turns. A survivor from the 7th Division, a young platoon commander with bandages covering half his face, is standing nearby smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. Explain, Vulov demands. We look through our special scope. We see the world in green, we see everything. But the beam ... he pauses, his hands trembling. The beam is a flashlight, Colonel, to the human eye, it's invisible. But in reality, the emitter glows red, and when dozens of our tanks turn on their beams in dusty, smoky air, the beams cross each other. They illuminate the dust particles, they create silhouettes, shadows. To see in the dark, a Syrian tank has to project a beam of infrared light. To human eyes, it's invisible, and worse, when dozens of Syrian tanks activated their IR beams simultaneously in the dust-choked air of the Golan battlefield, the beams became visible as pillars of illuminated particles. The Israelis, sitting in darkness with their engines off, didn't need sophisticated night vision. They didn't need to see the tanks. They just aimed at the source of the dozens of glowing red emitters and the pillars of dust lit up by invisible beams. Every time a Syrian tank commander activated his advanced night vision to find a target, he was essentially lighting a flare over his own head that said, "I am here. Shoot me." The conclusions he's writing contradict everything the Communist Party teaches about warfare. They undermine decades of Soviet military doctrine. The tank is a consumable asset, meant to be produced in massive numbers, small enough to be difficult to hit, cheap enough to replace. The loader works in a space the size of a closet, lifting heavy shells while the gun breech recoils inches from his chest. It's hot, it's loud, it's terrifying. Their reaction time slow, their accuracy drops. Their loading speed falls to 2 rounds per minute. The Western philosophy, embodied in the shot call, is individualist. The tank is huge. Yes, it's a barn. But inside, it's an office, Vulov writes furiously. The enemy tank is inferior in armor protection. It is inferior in top speed. It presents a larger target profile. However, it possesses decisive advantages in crew ergonomics, sustained combat effectiveness, and practical battlefield adaptability. He pauses, then adds a sentence that he knows will cause a storm in the Kremlin. Superior technology is meaningless if the crew is too exhausted to employ it effectively. The Israeli loaders, standing on flat turret floors and high-roofed turrets, can grab rounds easily and maintain high rates of fire indefinitely. While Syrian loaders are struggling to align shells in bouncing, cramped coffins, Israeli loaders have already fired 3 times. In the Valley of Tears, where ranges were short and targets were abundant, rate of fire was the only metric that truly mattered. The Israelis put 3 times more metal in the air than the Syrians, despite having 1/10 the number of tanks. There's one final detail that Vulov includes in his report, a detail that will eventually lead to the complete redesign of Soviet tanks and the development of the T-72 NT-80. During the detailed examination of the captured tank, the mechanics found a specific handle near the commander's seat. The commander's override in a Soviet tank, the command structure is rigid. The commander commands, the gunner shoots. If the commander sees a target, he has to verbally direct the gunner, target left. Traverse left, tank, range 800. The gunner then has to locate the target, aim, and fire. This communication loop takes precious seconds, fatal seconds. In the Centurion, the commander has a joystick, a simple mechanical control. If he sees a threat that the gunner hasn't spotted, he can grab the joystick, physically override the gunner, swing the massive turret himself, and lay the gun directly on target. He can essentially aim for the gunner, then hand control back, hunter-killer capability. Vulov writes, the Israeli commander searches for the next target while the gunner engages the current one. They are processing the battlefield in parallel, not in series. They are operating at twice our decision-making speed. As the war grinds toward its conclusion in late October 1973, the Valley of Tears remains firmly in Israeli hands. The Syrian army has lost over 1,000 tanks in that sector alone. The Israeli 7th Armored Brigade has been reduced to a handful of operational vehicles held together by improvised repairs and sheer determination, but they held the line against impossible odds. Vulov's report is sent to Moscow via secure channels. It causes an immediate crisis in the Kremlin. Emergency meetings are convened. The T-60 tank, the pride of the Red Army, the machine that was supposed to roll to the English Channel in a week if war ever came, has been comprehensively stopped by a 1940 British chassis with a new engine and a better gun. The shock for Soviet military leadership isn't that their tanks are bad. The T-62 is, objectively, an excellent piece of engineering. The shock is that they were designed for the wrong kind of war. They were optimized for a massive rolling offensive across the flat plains of northern Europe, supported by tactical nuclear weapons and overwhelming artillery. They were not designed for a chaotic, close-range knife fight in volcanic rock where individual crew skill, gun depression angles, and sustained rate of fire matter more than frontal armor thickness or top speed on flat ground. The mystery of how 100 tanks stopped 1,400 isn't a miracle. It's not divine intervention or superior courage, though courage certainly played its role. It's a triumph of systems integration and human-centered design. The Israelis took an obsolete tank and methodically upgraded every system that mattered in actual combat. They installed a reliable diesel engine to keep crews fresh and reduce fire risk. They upgraded the gun to penetrate any armor. They optimized the interior layout for sustained human performance. And crucially, they trained their crews to exploit terrain and leverage the specific advantages their platform provided. The Soviets focused obsessively on hard statistics, armor thickness, gun caliber, top speed, unit cost. They built a tank for a spreadsheet. The West won on soft statistics that don't appear on specification sheets: gun depression angle, crew comfort, sustained rate of fire, optical clarity, and ergonomic efficiency. They built a tank for humans. Years later, military historians analyzing the Golan Heights campaign will identify it as the graveyard of the quantity has a quality all its own doctrine. The sight of hundreds of T-60 tanks burning in the valley proved conclusively that in modern mechanized warfare, being seen first and shooting first matters infinitely more than how many friends you brought to the fight. The Soviet advisors left Damascus quietly in the weeks following the ceasefire. They left behind a broken army, shattered equipment, and a severely damaged reputation. But they took with them lessons that would fundamentally reshape Soviet tank design for the next decades. They realized, finally, that you cannot simply automate victory through superior production numbers. You still need competent humans in the decision-making loop. And those humans need room to breathe, space to work, and equipment designed around their capabilities rather than in spite of them. They learned that a gun must be able to depress low enough to engage targets in varied terrain. That crews must be able to sustain combat effectiveness for days, not hours. That optical quality matters as much as electronic sophistication. In the end, the Valley of Tears was saved not by a secret laser weapon or a hidden missile system or superior numbers. It was saved by a tungsten dart fired from a well-designed gun by a crew that was too exhausted to aim properly. It was saved by a diesel engine that didn't catch fire and a transmission that didn't require superhuman strength to operate. The logic of the battlefield is cruel and unforgiving. It does not respect the theoretical specifications or the price tag of your equipment. It does not care about your doctrine or your ideology or your production capacity. It respects only one thing: the crew that remains effective, accurate, and alive when everything around them is burning. The Syrian offensive failed not because their tanks were inferior in isolation, but because the system surrounding those tanks, the human factors, the training, the ergonomics, the tactical doctrine, was optimized for a different kind of war. And in the volcanic dust of the Golan Heights, that difference measured in crew comfort and gun depression angles proved more decisive than a 10-to-1 numerical advantage. The Soviets learned the T-7 that followed would have better gun depression. The T-80 would have improved crew stations. Future doctrines would emphasize combined arms coordination rather than pure armored mass. But in October 1973, in a narrow valley of volcanic rock, the future of tank warfare was written in the wreckage of a doctrine that forgot the most important variable in any weapon system: the human being operating it.